Welcome to the Speak Like a Leader podcast with John Bates. Welcome to the show. I've got a great guest today whom I met in, where were we? In Florida somewhere. And he is absolutely fascinating. And he's somebody that you need to follow. You need to pay attention to what he's doing. I am following him, paying attention to what he's doing and working with him. But before I bring him in, I want to just ask you a big favor. Would you please go give us a great rating on whatever app you're using to listen to the podcast? We have now crossed over 100 episodes, and I am doing my darndest to get this message out and these great conversations out to other people and grow the podcast. And you could play a really big part in that if you would give us a great rating and maybe some good comments about why you like livelikealeader.show. And it would mean a lot to me and a lot to the whole team here at livelikealeader.show. That being said, Eric Collett is the principal and CEO of A Mind for All Seasons, which is an innovative company. I agree. It is an innovative company specializing in helping people of all ages optimize their cognitive functioning and improve symptoms of post-concussive disorders, dementia, brain fog, anxiety, depression, ADHD, and other brain-related conditions. He is a nationally recognized speaker. I've heard him speak. He's fabulous. He is a consultant and dementia expert, a licensed residential care administrator, a teacher at the College of Western Idaho, and has also taught at Boise State University. He believes in lifelong learning, and he is a testament to his belief because he knows he's the smartest guy in the room. That's for sure. It's hard for him to not be the smartest guy in the room. I've been in rooms with him, and he has focused his life here in supporting people with their brain health. And I just think, pretty much everybody listening to this, me, you, everybody, like our brain is our number one tool. Like that's the thing that we're using. And if we're not optimizing our brain health, then I think we're missing out on sharpening our most important tool. So Eric, welcome to livelikealeader.show. I'm glad to have you.
It's such a privilege to be here, John. And I'm just excited to get to hang out with you for a little bit today.
Likewise. So, I want to talk about what you do, and I want to talk about brain health, and I want to go deep geek on the neurobiology and stuff. But before we do that, I want to say that, as much as you're a nationally recognized expert and you've got all this focus on brain health, you also own a company and you've been a leader and at a lot of different companies and had a lot of experience in leadership. And that's what we talk about here, among other things. So what was, one of your most important leadership lessons? You got any for us?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I spent a lot of years earlier on in my career asking the question, how do I get this person to do what I think he or she needs to be doing in the organization? And I think there's a better question. I think part of leadership is learning to ask better questions. And for me, instead of asking, how do I get this person to do what he or she ought to do? I think a more effective question is, how could I create the conditions under which this person is more likely to choose to do what he or she ought to do?
Okay, that's really, really good. Will you say that one more time? That's really, really good.
Sure. So instead of asking, how do I get this person to do what I want he or she to do, just ask, how could I create the conditions under which this person would be more likely to choose to do what I'm hoping that they'll do? Humans hate to be told what to do. We want to feel like we're steering the ship and that we're in charge and that it's our idea. And if all you're doing is trying to force people into compliance, then you'll never get more than surface level compliance. They will be seething and angry and frustrated under the surface, and they might go along to get along, but they're certainly not going to buy in, and you can't build a movement that way.
Yeah.
I think there are three things that people really need to be motivated from within. And I think to truly lead people it's to be the shepherd, not the sheep herder. It's to be out in front and people choose to follow because they absolutely want to. So number one thing that leaders have to do is paint a vision of a brighter tomorrow. All great leaders in history have done that, and they talk about it with visionary language. And people show it because they want to do that thing. Number two, people have to have maximum freedom within boundaries. None of us do very well if there are no boundaries. But if there are too many boundaries and we don't have maximum freedom within that, then we feel stifled and micromanaged. Number three is people have to feel like what they do is absolutely necessary to the outcome. If they don't feel like something big is riding on their effort, then it's harder to be intrinsically motivated. But boy, if you give someone a vision that they're moving toward and lots of freedom, but you've got some guardrails up and they feel like what they do absolutely matters, they're going to perform at a higher level.
I couldn't agree more. That's really, really brilliant. Now, here's the hard part. What have you done to create those conditions? How have you, does any story come to mind where things maybe weren't working as well as you wanted them to, and you did this and it made a difference?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think I've tried to apply it in 1,000 different ways for many, many years. I think one of the biggest challenges that I've run into as a leader is needing to figure out what my own special superpowers are and how to stay focused on that, and then fire myself from every other job. So one of the most important things that my business partner, Randy, who's our chief medical officer here at Mind for All Seasons, and I have done is we fired ourselves from really trying to run the day-to-day of the company. We're still heavily involved, but we brought in a chief operating officer who's kind of our integrator. He helps translate the vision into a system, and he focuses on things and is really good at things that I'm not so good at. And part of what he's done is to just help us establish those systems and processes that kind of function as guardrails while allowing me to keep innovating and allowing Randy to keep exploring. And that's been really valuable for us.
Yeah, that's really great. You know, it reminds me of the time I spent on Necker Island with Richard Branson. He told us about, I know it's no secret that he's got learning disabilities and like dyslexia and things like that. And he said that when he would go into a business, he would go in and he would try and do stuff and get into the, this particular business, and he would, get to know it as well as he could and do as well as he could in it. But he wasn't really very good at it. And one of the things he was looking for was people that were good at different aspects of that business. And then after doing it for a few months, he would just go hire the people that he had found that were really good at what he was trying to do but not good at. And then he'd step back and like applaud for them and empower them and have them go be great at what he had hired them to do and what they loved to do. And I'm convinced that that's why he's the billionaire and they're only multimillionaires, right? Is because he found the best people and then stood back and applauded while they just did great work, Yeah.
And I think not only that, but he's doing something that you work really hard to help people do. And that's to tell stories.
Yeah.
The visionary leader learns how to communicate through stories, because the part of the brain that actually motivates us to action is the limbic brain. That's what first gets us moving. And stories connect with the limbic brain. You talk about this all the time, John. So when someone learns how to tell a compelling story and they can wrap their vision in a story, then they help people feel motivated. And those people move forward at a higher level. And I think Richard Branson gets good at telling stories that inspire his people. And sometimes the stories are wacky, crazy stunts that attract a lot of
Yeah.
attention, but he's been really good at that kind of a thing.
Been really good at that. Yes, he's certainly. And it's funny to think about how much I would much rather fly Virgin than someplace like United, and I think a lot of that has to do with the stories or the lack of stories, and there's more going on there, I suppose. But I do think it's so key. It's so key. And you're so right. That's the limbic part is where action originates, and stories are how we access that.
Mm-hmm.
So digging further into the brain with that as a subject, you've been doing this for a while at A Mind for All Seasons, and you work, with a lot of people at a lot of different stages. I mean, you work with, very old people who have serious dementia. You work with people who maybe have brain fog from like a bout with long COVID. You work with kids with ADHD, I think, and you work with people with depression and anxiety and, people who've had concussions. What are some of the things that have stood out for you and maybe even surprised you as you've been going into this world more?
I think the biggest surprise for me, that is still an emerging one, and it makes it so much fun because it's like putting together a puzzle, is to see that so much research from researchers who don't know each other, who are really working in different spaces, is converging on the same basic formula to get a brain better. And that's going to sound ludicrous to some people that, wait a minute, to get a brain better that's dealing with something like anxiety or depression is basically the same formula that you would use to get someone better from an attention deficit problem or a dementing illness. And the answer right now, tentatively, is yes. It has to be personalized. There's a lot of nuance to this, but overall, there's a lot of research that's pointing to one key formula for getting a brain better. And that was so surprising to me. I never could have imagined that.
Yeah. Wow. So I know you can't tell us the whole formula, but let's talk a little bit about give us the big picture view of that convergence.
The big picture formula is that you have to calm inflammation and increase energy production. And the thing that is involved in both parts of that equation is mitochondria. Now, if you take high school or college biology, you learn mitochondria are the powerhouse of the cell, and they are. But starting in the early 2000s, there's work from people like Dr. Robert Navio at UCSD, who started identifying that maybe mitochondria have a lot more to do with other functions than just energy production. Maybe they're like the frontline workers in a business that are actually making everything happen. And there's evidence that mitochondria are like a switch for the immune system, and that they influence neurotransmitter production, and that they influence hormone production. And so in every sort of brain disorder that we see, there's a problem of metabolism. And most people hear metabolism and they think, oh, weight gain, weight loss. Like, oh, I have a sluggish metabolism. If I look at a box of Krispy Kremes, I gain 5 pounds. And people joke about it. But when you're talking metabolism to a neuroscientist, what you're really talking about is how cells function. And there is a lot of dysfunction in cells in all sorts of cognitive and mental health disorders. So fundamentally, if you can help mitochondria function better, you get better outcomes. And the way that you do that is figuring out what has them all fired up. Meaning what has the immune system all turned on? What's causing chronic inflammation? How can you turn that off? And then how can you, in turn, increase energy production at the cellular level? So a couple quick examples. I've had the privilege of working with several retired NFL players, and they've taken a lot of hits to the head, as you can imagine. And when you hit your head, or even if you just run into something and you're moving really fast and you stop, your brain moves forward and it compresses against the front of the skull, and then it compresses on itself. And it can do a lot of damage in a situation like that. What happens if you cause an inflammatory response in the frontal lobe because the brain compresses on itself, there's some damage, and the immune system turns on to deal with that? Well, you get a drop in energy production in the front part of the brain. What does that look like outwardly? Well, you see a drop in reasoning and judgment and planning. You see a person that, from an emotional standpoint, they can go from 0 to 100 with the flip of a switch. They might be really pleasant one minute and fighting mad the next. They might be losing their social filter. They might have an attention deficit kind of problem because the governor that would hold it all in check and allow their thoughts to not be bouncing around everywhere is producing a really low level of energy. And that's just the consequence of the immune system being turned on. So if you could calm it down and get that functionality restored, then those symptoms clear up. And that's exactly what we see in some of these football players that we've worked with. We calm the inflammatory response, and lo and behold, their wives are thanking us that they're easier to live with, and they're not rage machines anymore, and they're not saying things that are really out of character. So it's interesting to see how, regardless of the part of the brain that you're dealing with, if you can improve mitochondrial functioning by calming that inflammatory response, things just tend to go better.
So it seems to me like there are so many things that cause inflammation. Like it seems to me from my perspective, like playing whack-a-mole. So, what do you guys do? How do you make that a more boundable problem?
I think first of all, anyone listening to this needs to understand that when we talk about an inflammatory response, that's a way of saying the immune system is turning on. So if you're trying to figure out, well, what's firing up the immune response? Well, that's a little bit easier to understand for most people than what about this inflammation? And I think it's also important to understand that inflammation is really important. If your body can't turn on the immune response, it's a bit of a problem. But inflammation is like fire. Fire is neither good nor bad. Fire is fire. And we can cook things with it. We can sterilize things with it. We can keep ourselves warm. But if it's uncontrolled, it'll burn your house to the ground. Right. And the inflammation that is occurring with an immune response is the same thing. We need to be able to turn it on when it's time and turn it off. And so as far as sorting through all of that, ultimately, it has to be very personalized. And our approach is to take an extensive life history and really listen to people, find out what's been going on with their health, and look at symptoms that give us clues. We also do things like extensive blood work to look at inflammatory markers and to look at nutrient levels and to look at genetic factors that can play into this whole inflammatory response and that point the picture or help us clarify the picture of what's going on and what it is that we might need to do about it. So we have an organized process for sorting through all of that.
Yeah, I think it was when I went and did my blood test with you guys, I think it was like 16 vials.
Now you're going to scare people, John. They're going to be like, I don't even want to talk to this guy. Am I going to have anything left? No.
Well, but it, it just gives you such a deep understanding of what's actually going on, right? Like this is a complicated science to say the least, right? The brain is just unbelievably complex. And I think that it actually gave me a measure of confidence to know that you needed 16 vials of blood that you were going to check all those things, made me really happy to know.
Yeah. I appreciate you sharing some of your experience, John, because I do think part of what is missing in conventional medicine is having a broader view.
Yeah. Oh boy, I
There's,
couldn't agree more.
I have a lot of wonderful friends who are talented, very caring doctors, and they do good things, very good things. I have a high degree of respect for all of my physician friends.
Mm,
But I think one of the things that in general conventional medicine focuses on is asking the question, what? They ask, what are your symptoms? And what do
yeah.
we call those, AKA the diagnosis? And what is the standard treatment for that? And it's very easy to start focusing narrowly. And we've seen medicine get fractured into a whole bunch of subspecialties. So you go to the cardiologist for your heart, and you go to the
Yeah.
endocrinologist for hormonal issues and dealing with diabetes, and on and on. You see where I'm going with that. And yet the body
Yeah.
is a system of systems. And someone also needs to be a really good generalist on the scene to look at how
Yeah.
all those systems fit together and what the big picture view of all this is.
Yeah.
And that's really one of the key things that we strive to do to help people.
Yeah. Which is what I love, because I had a horrible, horrible experience with the specialized medical system in 2023 that just knocked me on my total butt for, almost a year. And I think one of the big problems was that I was dealing with people who were so over rotated in their specialty that they didn't see me as a holistic whole human. And they were just trying to deal with their little segment of this system of systems that I am. And it was exceedingly frustrating. It was one of the things that I really, really was jazzed about meeting you and finding out about A Mind for All Seasons. And what you do there is that you look at this person in front of you as a system of systems, and you see the holistic view as opposed to just the narrow focus that I think so much of our system is based on now.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that you see that. And I think that's starting to resonate with more and more people. A lot of people are recognizing this is complex, and maybe we should be looking at a bigger data set and considering a lot of different factors.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the other thing I like is that, I am interested in this, but it's not my field. And it's not, it's not the thing that I'm going to pick up a research paper and read about. Like I do that with other things, but not this particular thing. And I really like knowing that you guys are combing through all that stuff and are gathering up the best of that stuff and are, bringing those findings and all that learning and specifically tailoring it to me and what I need. Like, I think that's just super, super cool.
Well, it's certainly a lot of fun, and we kind of geek out on a daily basis, combing through what's coming out, because there's just been an explosion in our understanding of brain health and how to make it be better. But I think probably for most people that are listening to this podcast, it's very easy to start asking the question, okay, so therefore what? What does this mean to me? Why does this even matter to me? And
good question.
I'd like to take a stab at that, because I think it matters to all of us. You made the comment at the beginning of our discussion, John, that everybody has a brain and it controls things. And so intuitively, we know that brain health matters, but how do we get specific for us as individuals, and how do we even start to wrap our heads around what would be actionable from a discussion like this? So number one thing that I like to point out, especially to business leaders, is that our brain is our tool, and we live and work in a knowledge economy. And if the tool is as sharp as possible, then a whole lot goes better. I know lots of business leaders that go off to conferences and they learn great things like, I don't know, how to speak like a leader, or how to improve their storytelling ability. So they might hire a guy like John Bates to help them with something like that. And there's huge value in that. But to me, that's kind of analogous to software. And having the right software program for your computer can be a total game changer.
Yeah.
But if you're loading new software on old hardware that doesn't run very well,
Yeah.
sometimes you can't even make that software run at all. It's deeply problematic. Right. And so guys like you and other thought leaders that are training skills and teaching principles are doing an amazing job on the software side of things. But who's helping people with their hardware? And that's what we're trying to focus on and help people with. And the good news for your listeners is that there is all kinds of stuff that is foundational to good brain health. And it's largely stuff you can't medicate or supplement your way out of. These are lifestyle decisions. And once you understand the science of how these choices affect you, it's easier to make decisions that help you have a better brain and reduce risk of dementing illnesses like Alzheimer's disease down the road and have a better quality of life. So there are actionable things that people can do right now on a day-to-day basis to have a better brain. And it won't cost them anything except just focus and making the choice to do it.
So can we talk about a couple of those?
Yeah, absolutely.
So what would be, I mean, and it doesn't have to be the first and only one, but what would be the first one that comes to your mind?
Yeah. Can I give you a visual image for you and the listeners, John? Think about wherever you are with your brain health as being on one side of a river or a chasm of some sort. And on the other side is your brain in a way better state. So we've got to build a bridge. And there's a lot of that has to be personalized. And that's where blood work and health history and all the process that we use at A Mind for All Seasons comes into play. But what about just building the foundation? The size bridge that you can build is totally dependent on the strength of the foundation. Yeah. So if you look at something like the Golden Gate Bridge, it has these huge towers with pylons that go deep down into the sea floor, and they are anchored deeply because you cannot support a massive, really successful bridge without that. And when it comes to brain health, you got to go deep on foundational things. And I think you mentioned exercise. So let's just start there because that is absolutely foundational to good brain health. A lot of people exercise because they want to look good in a bathing suit. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But what people don't realize is that physical activity does a lot of good things for the brain. It improves blood flow. It stimulates the body to make more and bigger mitochondria. That's pretty important if we're trying to up energy production. It stimulates the production of a hormone for brain cell growth. It's called BDNF, or brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And physical activity is one of the best things that you could do to stimulate that. There is a ton of research on exercise and brain health, and it's all very positive. That if you exercise consistently, it not only reduces dementia risk, but it improves cognitive functioning and it improves mental health substantially.
Yeah. Well, I think about that because, I'm fascinated with the brain and study it from a slightly different angle than you do. But I recently, maybe a year or two ago, listened to a great podcast with Sam Harris where he was talking to a woman who was a brain scientist. And, if you look at it, as I understood it, if you look at it, plants don't have brains and probably the reason they don't have brains is because they don't move. Like brains fundamentally evolved in correlation with movement. Because if you want to move around in your environment, you've got to have some sort of a brain to coordinate that movement and all that activity. And so there is this very, very, very deep, direct link between motion and your brain. And so that, it makes a lot of sense to me that exercise and movement would be important in brain health because that's why the brain evolved, arguably.
Yeah. There's even research showing that if you're learning something while you're moving, that you're much more likely to remember it.
Really? Wow. I
And
did not
it's
know
one of the
that.
reasons why when I go out for a run in the morning, I like to listen to a podcast or an audiobook or something that I'm trying
Yeah.
to learn. And it's
Learn.
amazing how often I can drive past the route that I have run and I'll remember something that I learned at that point on the run. There's this
That's,
connection. And that was not
yeah,
something that I was fully expecting.
that is really, really interesting. That's cool. Yeah. Okay. So exercise is one. Is there maybe one more?
Oh, there's several more, and we can
Uh-huh.
go as deep as you want on any of them. But one of the biggest things that I would mention is diet.
Okay. Let's talk about diet.
So diet is really complex, and there's hardly a subject in the health world that will bring out more tribalism than to talk about diet. And
Right.
you have your carnivore advocates and your vegan
Mm.
advocates and your autoimmune paleo advocates and on and on and on. And I think that there are some commonalities in all of those dietary strategies. And
Mhm.
rather than kind of getting into a tribalistic view, what I'd rather do is focus on some principles that make a difference for people,
I love it.
because every human body is a little bit different. And the first principle I'd say is that food is fuel. I realize food is wrapped up in our cultural celebrations and ways that we express love and gratitude to other people and all sorts of other things that go
Self-esteem and
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
like, it
totally.
goes everywhere.
So I know that food is complex, but fundamentally food is fuel. And how we fuel the body is impacted by how we're running the engine. So at the outset, why does food even matter? If I'm a business leader listening to this, I'm thinking, well, obviously I've got to eat, but how do I even know where to start? And why does this matter to me if I want to have a better brain? There are a lot of different ways to answer that, but one thing I'd say is that Alzheimer's disease is nicknamed diabetes of the brain for a reason. Because in a substantial number of Alzheimer's cases, patients have insulin resistance in the brain. So insulin is the hormone that allows us to deliver glucose into the cell so that it can be converted into energy. And when insulin goes up, the sensitivity of insulin receptors goes down. It's kind of like if someone's whispering, you listen closer, you sort of lean in and you increase sensitivity with your hearing. But if a jet engine turns on, you very quickly downregulate your hearing. You put on ear protection because the signal is so loud. And with insulin, same kind of thing happens. If you're eating the standard American diet that is loaded in sugary beverages and highly processed food and refined carbohydrates, then there's a lot of sugar coming into the system, and there is a massive insulin response. And so insulin receptors get less sensitive. And if you're less sensitive at the signal that allows that glucose to get into the cell, you have a harder time producing energy. You also, if you're eating the standard American kind of diet that's really high in carbs, you have these peaks and crashes. And so many people nowadays in the workplace are on a seesaw where they eat something really sugary, and it may even be a bowl of oatmeal. Like wear a glucose monitor, check your blood sugars when you eat a bowl of oatmeal. I have no problem with oats. But if your goal is to have steady sugars, then eating a bowl of oatmeal is not going to do it. You're going to have a pretty substantial rise in most cases. But then you're going to come down the other side. And when you crash, a couple of things are going to happen. You're going to have a hormonal release that causes you to feel very hungry. And it's probably going to happen 1 to 2 hours after you ate the meal. So you're not even going to make it to lunchtime or in between meals. You're going to be crying out for food and feeling like you're depleted because your sugar and insulin go up, and then what goes up must come down, and they come back down. The other thing that happens is for many people, there's kind of some increased anxiety as those sugars are dropping. And it doesn't feel good. So what do people do? Well, they naturally just eat a snack. Maybe they have a Snickers bar and their sugar and insulin goes right back up. And then what do you eat for lunch? Well, if you eat pizza or hamburger or French fries or something for lunch, then it's another spike and crash. And over time, that style of eating pattern not only puts us on an energy seesaw, but it's also a recipe for developing type 2 diabetes and ultimately type 3 diabetes. And there's a reason that type 2 diabetes has gone through the roof over the last few decades and that we have an obesity epidemic. So how do you curb that? Here are a few key principles about food. I've already given you one. Food is fuel. The next thing I'd focus on is whatever your dietary strategy is, make sure that you are not provoking a massive release of sugar and the insulin that has to go with that. Make sure that you're keeping your sugars steadier. There's more than one way to do that. But make sure that you're not having peaks and crashes, because those crashes are really hard on the body and it gets us into trouble. Number 3, and these are really in no particular order, eat real food.
Yeah.
I don't care who you're talking to that's advocating for a lot of the diets that are kind of faddish right now, and a lot of people are strong advocates. What they mostly have in common is processed food is a disaster, so steer clear of it at all costs. If it was made in a factory in the Southeast United States and shipped to a warehouse in Arkansas and stamped with a date on a box that says it can sit on the shelf for the next 12 months and it's still sellable, it's probably not real food. So look for things that are real, whole, raw, in the form that you find them in nature, and you're probably going to be making better choices with that than eating processed stuff. And then make sure that you're eating based on your goals. What's your goal with a meal? Well, if you're trying to build muscle, you need an insulin response and you need the building block of muscle, which is protein. So that would be a great time to have the bowl of oatmeal, unless your stomach doesn't respond well to oatmeal, but do something with real food that provokes an insulin response and pair it with protein. And that's a good time to do it. If you're sedentary, then that's not going to be the right option for you. If you're doing brain work, then trending more in the direction of a really low carb, higher good fat kind of diet is probably going to serve you better in a moment like that. So fuel yourself based on your goal.
That's good. I like that. So, you know, I don't want to not talk about this, even though it's maybe a sad or even touchy subject, but my mom has dementia quite badly. And we didn't realize how bad it was until my dad died. And then it became super, super obvious that we hadn't realized how bad it was. And, you know, I mean, it's scary for me because, you know, that's my mom and like I'm genetically fairly similar. And I think that we've got a real crisis with dementia and Alzheimer's that is just building and building and building and doesn't seem to be getting any better. And I wonder what you think about that whole thing. I mean, you know,
yeah.
I mean, we should maybe have a whole nother podcast just about dementia and Alzheimer's and things like that. But, you know, I don't want to go there, you know? And I mean, in a way it's almost scary because like I'm already old enough that if that's happening, it's been happening for a while. Right. But there are things that I can do. There are ways that I can, you know, make it better or make it worse. Right.
Yeah. There's actually a lot wrapped up in what you just said. So many people don't recognize that Alzheimer's disease starts 10 or 20 years as far as the actual pathology that shows up in
Yeah.
the brain, there's evidence that that starts 10 or 20 years before outward symptoms show up. And the
Yeah.
lifestyle decisions that lead to those kinds of things start very early on.
Mm,
So it's not a little thing that you said, hey, I'm of an age that some of this stuff may already be going on. But I think it's
right.
important for listeners to know that a lot of the top researchers in the Alzheimer's world have come out in the last 10 years or so and said that many, many Alzheimer's cases, a large percentage of cases, are preventable. And they're
Mm,
driven by lifestyle factors that we can control. The problem is
yeah.
we want to have our cake and eat it too. We want to abuse our
Mm,
bodies and eat whatever the heck we want, and then hope that when
right.
the wheels fall off, we can go to the doctor and there's some sort of magic answer. And when it comes to
Yeah.
lifestyle diseases like Alzheimer's and heart disease, there's not a magic answer. There's
Yeah.
a lot of emerging science about what you can do, but I sincerely believe that the very best way to treat Alzheimer's is to never get it in the first place.
Yeah.
And that requires foresight and commitment and a different mindset than a lot of our society has. So my team and I are
Yeah.
actually on a mission to save 1 million brains by 2030 by helping people engage in exactly what they need to do to prevent. And it is possible, but it takes a commitment to doing those things.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's one of the reasons I'm so glad that you took the time to join me today, because I want everybody that I know and love and care about to have a healthy brain. And I think that what you guys are doing at A Mind for All Seasons is just really, really a fabulous contribution. And I think that it's a very timely, necessary, growing, more important contribution,
Thank you.
Now,
I think if people will just leave the sick care system, I'm not saying
yeah,
that there aren't times when we desperately need exactly what conventional medicine has to offer. If I need microvascular surgery, sign me up. But
yeah,
in general, let's not wait until things fall apart to take ownership over our health. And I've seen over and over with business leaders that a little bit of intentional effort and some blood work and they're doing the right things can help a person improve their cognitive scores, in many cases 20 to 30% in a matter of a few months of doing the right things. If you could get your
yeah,
tool that much sharper, everything functions better.
yeah. That's fabulous. I love that. And if people want to read more about this or follow you, they can go to amindforallseasons.com. And when you get to amindforallseasons.com, you can sign up for free for a newsletter called The Mindful Brain, which Eric and his team put out. And that is all about learning how to optimize your brain health. And, for all the other courses and all the other things that we're out there trying to get better at and optimize, I do think that this is one of those prime, base, most important functions, like everything else you're doing uses your brain. So you might as well give your brain some real fundamental love, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, and then you'll learn about the other foundational things that we didn't have time to talk about, like sleep and stress management and brain training and all the other fun stuff. So, yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, I highly recommend it. I mean, of all the things that you could do for yourself, I think this is one of the most core and fundamental. And Eric, I it's just a pleasure to know you. I'm glad that you could make time to join us today. And is there anything that I didn't ask or anything that you'd like to say before we wrap up?
I think you asked some great questions, John. Had a great time being here with you today. I would just sum it up by saying that regardless of who you are, regardless of your background, regardless of your genetics, there's a lot that's controllable when it comes to your brain health. And any of us can either choose to be proactive or we can be reactive. And I would contend that we're far better off by being proactive when it comes to our brain health. So I might sum up with a little quote, and I have no idea where I heard it from, but it stuck with me for years. It's easier to prepare and prevent than it is to repair and repent in life. And that's certainly true when it comes to your brain health.
Yeah, that's great. Well, so here's to preparing and preventing. And thanks for joining us and sharing some strategies on that. And again, amindforallseasons.com. And thanks for joining us, Eric.
Thank you. I appreciate being here.
And thank you for joining us and for listening to Live Like a Leader. We'll see you next time, and have a great, great week. Thank you for joining the Speak Like a Leader podcast. Go be awesome.